What's the best cross-country two-seater? So if your mission is to cover serious miles without stepping up to a four-seat airplane, you want speed, efficiency, and the range to make long legs practical. In this lineup, we'll look at some of the top two-seaters built for real travel. Aircraft that fly farther, faster, and cheaper than most trainers, but still keep operating costs well below the big touring machines. Starting off, the JMB VL3 with the Rotax 916 IS is basically a pocket rocket built for real cross-country work. With the 160 horsepower 916, you're looking at headline speeds around 200 knots up high and realistic cruise in the mid to high 180s at practical altitudes. Independent flight tests on the 915-powered VL3 reported 170 knots indicated cruise during evaluation and a top claim of 200 knots at flight level 180. The 916 adds a little more power and better efficiency, so treating 180 to 190 knots as your honest planning number is sensible. The airframe is composite retractable with a ballistic parachute option and modern Garmin Glass/autopilot integrations. Fuel and burn rates are where the Rotax shines. The 916 IS is rated 160 horsepower maximum continuous at 5,500 RPM, with FADEC managing mixture automatically. Typical cruise fuel flow for 915 and 916 installs sits roughly 8.5 to 9 gallons per hour in the fast cruise regime, with notably lower flows available at economy settings. A commonly seen VL3 configuration carries about 37 US gallons usable with a maximum takeoff weight near 1,320 pounds and a useful load around 529 pounds in the European ultralight spec. Flying spec sheet for the 915 power demonstrator shows about 37 gallons fuel, 530 pounds useful, 575 feet takeoff landing distances, a 43 knot stall, and the 200 knots max speed figure. Pull it back to a sweet spot econ cruise in the mid-teens. Think 65 to 70% power, where the turbo is happy and the prop is set for 170 to 180 knots. You can stretch usable endurance to roughly 4 to 4.5 hours, and the still air range to 700 to 800 nautical miles. With two on board, the math changes because of payload. Using 529 pounds useful load example, full fuel weighs 223 pounds, so with two 198-pound adults, you'd bust maximum takeoff weight. In that case, you'd typically cap fuel around 22 US gallons to stay legal. At 9 gallons per hour, that's about 2.5 hours to dry. After reserve, figure 2 hours usable. Call it 350 nautical miles at fast cruise, or 400 nautical miles if you lean on economy settings. In other words, solo, the VL3 can cover very long legs. With two, plan a fuel stop on medium to long trips. Power settings and sweet spots are straightforward. The 916's max continuous is 5,500 RPM. That's a good ceiling for long cruise. Many owners report the best speed per liter in the 5,000 to 5,300 RPM range in the low to mid-teens, where the turbo maintains manifold pressure without chasing diminishing returns, and the composite airframe keeps true airspeed high. FADEC makes mixture a non-issue. You set prop and watch cylinder head temperature, exhaust gas temperature, and fuel flow. Plan oxygen if you want the biggest true airspeed numbers. The published 200 knots figures assume the high teens. Handling compared to a trainer is friendly but faster. Stalls are benign and slow, and short grass strip performance is excellent for something this slick. But it's a retractable, constant speed, high-performance two-seater that carries energy. You'll fly disciplined speeds on approach, manage configuration changes thoughtfully, and respect its glide. Owners and reviewers praise the integration of Garmin G3X and autopilot. And many aircraft carry a ballistic chute and angle of attack, useful safety layers for UK weather and long legs. On price, recent reporting and listings give you the envelope. AOPA Guide suggested roughly $205,000 for a basic trainer spec, through about $330,000 for a 915 with dual-screen IFR glass. But current used listings run roughly $210,000 to $365,000. Expect a brand new, fully optioned 916 to sit at the top end of, if not above, those figures. Before we carry on, please give me a like, drop a comment, and also subscribe. It helps me a lot. Also, drop a comment if you want me to do best cheap two-seat airplanes, because everything I've listed so far sits in the premium category and costs serious money. Next is the Sparker TL Sport. The TL-Ultralight Sparker with the Rotax 916 IS is a true cross-country machine. Retractable, carbon Kevlar, side stick, and built around turbo power that keeps the speed up as you climb. Factory and dealer material plus show floor briefings put real-world cruise in the 165 to 175 knots band for the 915 and 916 installations, with stall down around the mid-40s thanks to slotted Fowler flaps. Several dealers quote 7.5 gallons per hour at fast cruise settings, which is why owners talk about bonanza-ish ground speeds on Rotax fuel bills. Fuel capacity depends on the build standard. European UL permit builds quote 90 to 130 liters usable. North American amateur-built examples are typically 34 to 41 US gallons. Maximum takeoff weight also varies. Some EU configs sit at 1,323 pounds, while US Mosaic-ready market aircraft quote 1,653 pounds. Put simply, tanks run 34 to 41 gallons, and useful load can exceed 600 pounds on the 1,653-pound versions, which lets you carry 2 large adults plus full fuel. With the 916 IS, you have 160 horsepower for takeoff and 137 horsepower continuous at 5,500 RPM, FADEC managed. Again, plan on oxygen if you want the very highest true airspeed numbers in the teens. At fast cruise, real-world fuel flow for 915 and 916 installations in this class runs about 7 to 9 gallons per hour depending on how hard you push. Range depends on which tank and weight variant you choose and how many people are aboard. Using a common 38-gallon configuration at a conservative 7.5 gallons per hour go places cruise, endurance to dry tanks is just over 5 hours. After a sober 45-minute reserve, you're at roughly 4.3 hours usable. At 170 to 175 knots, that's on the order of 730 to 755 nautical miles, still air. Solo, that's proper continent crosser territory. With 2 on board in the 1,653-pound builds, the published payloads comfortably support full fuel. So range is essentially unchanged. In 1,323-pound builds, you may need to cap fuel, in which case your with 2 aboard still air range looks more like 450 to 600 nautical miles, depending on how much you load the baggage bay and how much fuel you carry. Dealers and listings quote 900 to 1,000 miles at economy settings, which lines up with the math when you pull the power back. Power setting sweet spots are simple with FADEC. Use full power for departure, then set max continuous for the climb and early cruise while you settle, and once level, most owners find the best speed per liter between 5,000 and 5,300 RPM, where the turbo is happy and the prop is doing efficient work. If you want maximum number chasing, go higher with oxygen and expect fast cruise flows closer to the top of the 7 to 9 gallons per hour envelope. If you'd rather stretch range, pull it back towards 65 to 70% and watch the endurance grow. Compared to a basic trainer, the Sparker is easy to fly, but it carries energy like any sleek retractable. Reviews consistently call out light, well-balanced controls without being twitchy, friendly landings at 55 over the fence, and those highly effective slotted Fowlers that let you come down and slow down when you want to. The big canopy, wide cabin about 50 inches, Cirrus-wide, and modern Garmin G3X autopilot stack make IFR-style workloads far less fatiguing on long legs, though your actual IFR legality will depend on registration category and national rules. Here in Europe, there are gray areas. A ballistic chute is commonly fitted and widely promoted by the factory and distributor. On price, North American guidance from TL's distributor is that non-turbo builds start around $327,000 and turbo 915, 916 builds start around $380,000 with fully optioned 916 aircraft, triple screen glass, autopilot, chute, oxygen, premium interior, scaling above that. Public listings show new or near new examples in the mid-300,000s, while the used market is still thin. Earlier 912, 914, or 915 builds will generally sit lower than fully loaded 916s. The upshot is that the Sparker gives you big airplane cruise and comfort in a two-seat footprint. Next is the Elixir. The Elixir is the grown-up two-seater that flies like a modern trainer but tours like a small traveler. The signature is its carbon one-shot structure, which on the surface means fewer parts, simple maintenance. But I watched a Q&A by Captain Mike where he specifically asked, how do you make less parts? Is it like if something breaks, you have to replace the whole thing? The answer isn't giving simple maintenance. This aircraft comes standard with a whole airframe parachute, a single crash-worthy fuel tank, oleo gear, and a Garmin Glass autopilot stack laid out to cut workload. In the UK type certificate datasheet, the Elixir is cleared for day-night VFR with a ceiling of 16,000 feet and lists 100 liters usable fuel at a 1,389 pounds maximum takeoff weight. Performance depends on engine. With the 100 horsepower Rotax 912 IS, plan 125 knots at 75 to 85% power on about 3.5 gallons per hour, or 110 knots at 3 gallons per hour in economy. With the 140 horsepower Rotax 915 IS, Elixir publishes 150 knots at 75% on 7 gallons per hour and 158 knots at 85% on 9.5 gallons per hour. Pulled back to 50%, you'll still see 130 knots on 4.7 gallons per hour. Those are at 10,000 feet, with the constant speed prop doing the heavy lifting. Real owners gravitate to the 65 to 75% band as the sweet spot for speed per liter. Range is honest for a two-seat certified airplane. The 915 IS version works out to roughly 615 nautical miles at 75% power and 755 nautical miles at economy, all still air before you deduct your legal reserve. Loading is straightforward. Typical useful load figures reported during certification and early press were about 606 pounds. With 100 liters usable, you still have roughly 441 pounds left for people and bags, which means two 198-pound adults can depart with full fuel and a modest overnight kit without breaking limits. Avionics and ease of flying are a big part of the appeal. The airplane was designed as a trainer first, so you get spin-resistant aerodynamics, a gentle stall, wide-track fixed gear that soaks up student landings, and a standard ballistic parachute. Panels typically center on Garmin G3X Touch, with an IFR-grade navigator and GFC 500 autopilot available, which makes longer VFR touring far less fatiguing and positions the type well as IFR approvals expand outside the UK. Prices vary with engine and avionics. Published guidance and reporting over the last 2 years puts 912 IS school club builds in the €280,000 to €340,000 range and fully equipped 915 IS fast cruise builds around the upper €300,000 to roughly $400,000. The used market is still thin because the fleet is young. Most airframes live with schools and clubs for now. If you're comparing to VL3 Sparker ultralight rockets, the Elixir will be slower on top end but wins on certification, training, insurance friendliness, and cost per hour. Moving on, Glasair III's headline is speed. With a 300 horsepower Lycoming IO 540, a well-sorted Glasair III is a genuine 240 knots cruiser at typical cruise settings, and the book numbers back it up. 242 knots at 75% and 230 knots at 65%, both at 8,000 feet. Top-end bragging rights on Hot 3 builds and Reno-proven airframes are way north of that. But plan your trips on the 65 to 75% figures and you'll be happy. Fuel, burn, and tanks set your real range. Typical 3 fuel is 70 gallons usable, 62 wing plus 8 header. Many aircraft carry optional tip tanks for 81 gallons total. At 65% power, the owner's data pegged the 3 at 13.5 gallons per hour. At 75%, a 300 horsepower IO540 in this class usually lives around the mid-teens. Plain PhD aggregates 15.5 gallons per hour at 75% for the 3, which matches what many owners see rich of peak. Range with 1 aboard is excellent. Using the 3's published 65% fuel flow, 13.5 gallons per hour and 81 gallons, you've got roughly 6 hours to dry tanks. Subtract a sober 45-minute reserve and call it 5.25 hours usable. At the 65% book cruise of 230 knots, that's on the order of 1,200 nautical miles still air, close to the published 1,265 nautical miles figure, which already assumes a VFR reserve. With standard 70 gallons, the same math yields 4.8 hours to dry, 4 hours usable after reserve, and 930 nautical miles still air. The owner's table shows 1,077 nautical miles with VFR reserve at 65%. Your planning number sits comfortably between those depending on power and reserves. Range with 2 aboard depends on how much fuel you can carry to stay within gross. A typical 3 shows 1,625 pounds empty and 2,400 pounds max gross, 2,500 pounds with tips. That's 775 pounds useful at 2,400 pounds. 2 198-pound adults are 396 pounds, leaving 379 pounds for fuel and bags, about 63 gallons of avgas plus light luggage. At 65% and 13.5 gallons per hour, that's 4.5 hours to dry. After a 45-minute reserve, you've got approximately 4 hours usable. Cruise that at 230 knots, and you're looking at 900 nautical miles, still air 2 up. Load heavier bags or choose 75%, and the number tightens, go economy, and it grows. Full load thinking. If you truly fill the cabin, say 2 198-pound adults plus 50 pounds of baggage, you've got 329 pounds left for fuel, about 55 gallons. That's 4 hours to dry at 65%, 3.5 hours usable after reserve, and roughly 760 nautical miles still air at the 65% cruise. In other words, even at a busy touring load, you're still making continent-sized legs. The trade is reserve comfort versus ground speed and winds. Power settings and sweet spots are simple. Treat 65 to 75% as the everyday band. It's where the 3 gives you those 230 to 242 knots numbers without running fuel flows into the high teens. The plain PhD 75% figure of 15.5 gallons per hour is a good baseline rich of peak. If you're comfortable managing mixture and cylinder head temperatures, many owners run lean of peak at altitude to trade a handful of knots for significant range. Either way, the airframe speed is so high that slightly slower, a lot farther, is often the winning cross-country strategy. Handling is serious airplane territory compared to a trainer. The Glasair line carries wing loading and approach speeds that demand discipline, and the 3 adds retractable gear and big engine energy management. AOPA flight test notes on the 3 talk about light control forces and high wing loading. Transition training pays off. There are also well-known gear system nuances in the fleet. Maintenance and rigging matter, so you want a clean pre-buy and a mentor checkout. Once dialed, owners rave about the blend of speed and stability. What about buying one? New factory 3 kits aren't sold by Glasair today. The 3 assets were acquired and relaunched as all-carbon G3 heritage kits by Advanced Aero Components, who also support parts. Early kit pricing guidance for a bare airframe was just under $100,000, but that's before engine, prop, avionics, and systems. The used market is where most pilots shop. Recent public listings show Glasair III's roughly $115,000 to $275,000 plus, with unusually upgraded examples higher. As ever with experimentals, build quality, hours, maintenance history, and avionics drive value far more than model year. Last is the Shark Aerosark. The Shark is a tandem two-seater that trades cabin width for serious cross-country numbers on tiny fuel flows. In baseline form, it runs a 100-horsepower Rotax 912 ULS with retractable gear and a constant-speed propeller. Factory material quotes a maximum cruise figure around 155 to 162 knots depending on altitude, with stall speeds in the low 40s and a climb well over 1,200 feet per minute. The current flight manual for the 1,323 pounds version, Shark 600, lists usable fuel as either 26.4 U.S. gallons or an optional 39.6 U.S. gallons. Realistic cruise and fuel burn are easy to plan because there is solid third-party data. AOPA flight test with the 912-powered Shark recorded about 159 knots at about 6.5 gallons per hour near maximum continuous power, about 90% power, and about 127 knots at about 4 gallons per hour, around 55% power. A U.S. distributor specification sheet aligns closely, citing a maximum level flight speed near 157 knots, an economy cruise near 135 knots, and long-range fuel flows as low as about 3.5 gallons per hour when you really pull it back. Those numbers map well to how owners actually fly. Use the high 150s for fast cruise on about 6 to 7 gallons per hour, or settle into the 120s to 130s for exceptional miles per gallon. Range depends on which tanks you have and how hard you push. With the 39.6 US gallon option and the AOPA fast cruise datum, 159 knots on about 6.5 gallons per hour, endurance to dry tanks is roughly 6 hours. After a prudent 45-minute reserve, you have about 5.3 hours usable, or about 850 nautical miles still air. Pull back to the about 127 knots, about 4.5 gallons per hour economy setting, and the same 39.6 US gallons gives roughly 8.8 hours to dry, about 8 hours usable, and about 1,020 nautical miles still air. The distributor quotes similar or better book ranges, about 1,036 nautical miles in fast cruise and up to about 1,350 nautical miles in long-range cruise with 39.6 U.S. gallons. So using about 850 nautical miles fast and about 1,000 plus nautical miles economy as conservative planning numbers is sensible. With the 26.4 U.S. gallon tanks, the same math yields roughly about 520 to 530 nautical miles at fast cruise and about 680 nautical miles at economy, still air, with reserves. Payload drives what you can actually launch with. The factory presents a typical useful load for the Shark 600 on the order of about 551 pounds, while a United States test article listed about 670 pounds useful. Empty weights vary by build and kit options. On a 551 pounds useful airframe, two 198-pound adults leave about 155 pounds for fuel and bags. That's about 25 U.S. gallons of fuel with no baggage, or closer to about 21 to 24 U.S. gallons if you bring an overnight kit. In practice, that means your two-up fast cruise still air range is more like about 350 to 450 nautical miles before reserves, unless you fly economy. On a lighter empty, higher useful example, about 661 pounds useful, you can depart two-up with the 39.6 U.S. gallon tanks and real baggage, and your range reverts to the about 850 to 1,000 nautical miles figures above. Weights matter more than the brochure here. Check the actual empty weight of the airplane you are considering. Power setting sweet spots are straightforward. Treat the high 150s knots on about 6 to 7 gallons per hour as your make time setting, and the mid 120s to mid 130s knots on about 4 to 5 gallons per hour as your stretch range setting. The airplane will gladly cruise higher if you have oxygen, but you do not need the flight levels to see excellent true airspeed because the airframe is so clean. The factory cites 186 miles per hour, about 162 knots, maximum cruise at mean sea level for the 912. And its turbo variant pushes the high 180s knots at flight level 100 on very modest fuel flows. Impressive, but that is a different engine package and specification. Fuel and operations are friendly to United States and European wallets. The engine is cleared for unleaded automotive gasoline E5, unleaded 91 or 100 low lead, and the flight manual spells out the grades explicitly. Most owners try to run unleaded where available to avoid lead deposits and keep costs down. When you must burn 100 low lead, observe Rotax's lead management guidance. Ease of flying compared with a basic trainer is good, with caveats typical of a slick retractable. The Shark's side stick, semi-reclined seating, and canopy give excellent visibility and light, precise control feel. Approach and landing are straightforward once you respect energy and target speeds. Transition from a Diamond DA-20 or Cessna 152 style trainer is painless with a competent checkout, but you will manage configuration and speed more deliberately because it carries energy and arrives much faster. Prices depend heavily on engine, avionics, ballistic parachute, and tank options, and the factory does not publish a fixed manufacturer's suggested retail price. Recent United States coverage pegs a new Shark 600 around $300,000 well-equipped, while used listings in Europe for earlier 912 builds have shown asking prices roughly in the 170,000 euros band, plus or minus depending on condition and panel. As a certified style ultralight or light sport with low fuel burn and strong range, it tends to hold value, but empty weight and avionics specification drive resale. Verify the exact build sheet. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps me a lot.